This is Father Jacob-Bertrand Janczyk.
And this is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
Welcome to Godsplaining. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Joseph Anthony.
What's up?
How you doing?
Just peachy.
Really?
Yeah.
I hate Lent.
I'm not surprised.
I keep saying that at the parish, not like from the pulpit, but it's
Please
a bad
don't.
thing.
Yeah.
No, I know it's a bad thing. But like when we're like planning stuff, it's like Lent, gosh, it's tough. I like Advent. Advent's awesome.
Everybody loves Advent. It's just,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Some people like Lent.
well,
I don't.
weirdos.
It's tough. That's why I'm a
It's tough.
baby.
Yeah, that's what it
why.
is.
What kind of programming are you doing? Anything different on campus? What's going on for Lent?
Yeah, I mean, Lent is sometimes, it throws a curveball in the campus ministry world because we typically have spring break in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And so it depends on when spring break hits, when Ash Wednesday hits, and you're trying to like work out all these pieces. But we generally do some kind of days of reflection or things like that. We always do some mission trips. This year we're doing domestic trips across the nation and things like that. So it's just offering those opportunities to our students to make sure that they're engaged in acts of charity through that.
Yeah.
So it's actually a beautiful thing that those acts of charity and those opportunities when we take spring break to do that coincides with Lent.
Yeah.
And so that you can
that
actually
works
then
well.
really talk about, what does it mean to do almsgiving and different acts of mission or charity in that way. So we're afforded that opportunity, which I always appreciate, being in Lent and having that. Instead of looking at spring break as like, oh, I want to take a vacation, but I can't because it's Lent and I can't like treat yourself during Lent. That's not an official instruction of the church. During Lent, you cannot treat yourself, but you should increase your penance and prayer and almsgiving.
That's great. Nice. We're doing similar things at the parish too. Not so much the mission trips, but the kind of like I guess increased prayer and that sort of thing. So like Friday stations, we have weekly Holy Hour confession in the evening. We're not like big enough in the area to do like a penance service type thing. Okay. So kind of on a weekly basis offering additional confession time and whole time for a Holy Hour Eucharistic adoration. There's this, I don't know if it's weird, but it's different custom at the parish. Instead of doing like the traditional kind of like Friday fish fry kind of thing, they do, or we do, it's not they, it's we do this sort of soup supper on Wednesdays. So a little simpler thing with like a spiritual talk too. And that, which is always has like a great turnout from people. So yeah, it's nice. Like I said, Lent's not my favorite time, but there's a lot that's going on that's good. So
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, we're here not to talk about my not liking Lent, my sufferings through the season of Lent, but to talk about the issue, the topic. It could be an issue.
Isn't it an issue?
It might be for some people.
Well, it could be. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we'll get into that. But we're here to talk about the role of praise and worship music in Catholic life.
Absolutely.
So at least by way of starting the conversation, starting our consideration of it, I think it's at least helpful to like pitch or set up this sort of problem, the issue, the question, not a problem, but just like, why are we talking about this? Right. So, super quickly, people might, those of you who are listening might already be able to put together the sort of dispute about where does praise and worship music fit within Catholic living. And, I think we can look at it in two kind of worlds that aren't mutually exclusive, but have different kind of, ways by which we relate differently or in different aspects, contexts, how we relate to the Lord. So on the one hand, I think we can talk about our own spiritual life, our own prayer life, our own devotion, that sort of thing. And the other world, we can talk about Catholic liturgy, worship, specifically more the sort of formal kind of, worship of the church. So we'll talk about both. But I guess the question then, the question that I was kind of like going to throw out is, well, where does it fit? Is praise and worship an appropriate form, music, praise and worship music? Is it appropriate to Catholic life? Is it appropriate to Catholic liturgy on the one hand? And is it appropriate for Catholic spirituality, devotion, these sort of things? I think I would wager to guess, and perhaps this will be fleshed out as we talk through things. The spiritual life, devotion is probably less problematic, or there would be less of a divide of sort of this is good, bad, as opposed to the liturgical side. I think on question, like talking about, does praise and worship fit into like the mass, for example? People, I think, have stronger opinions on that sort of world. So before getting into that, though, I guess, I don't know, I think we both have had positive experiences or relationships to praise and worship music. So
I mean, I'm going to come out of the gate really strong and say I'm pro praise and worship.
And both worlds.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think you have to be intentional about it. I think it can be done really, really well. And if we approach it and have true musicians that are assisting and understand its proper place and not turning it into a performance and things like that, even in a devotional setup, right? A non-liturgical setup, even if it's a devotional thing, like we have to make sure that this isn't performance-based, and that it can truly be, non-liturgical, but in a way that is leading towards leading towards God himself, and it can be done that way. So I think it just coming out strong out the gate, like I think some of my most beautiful encounters with the Lord have been assisted by praise and worship, and that includes even in the Mass. So there are really, really beautiful things, and I'm going to say out of the gate, I'm pro praise and worship, but I also think that it's important to say, like, well, let's then be intentional about it, because it's not something that you can just like then unleash and say then it's all okay. No, we have to. There are some aspects and some ways to do that, and maybe probably the common experience of it isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
Right. Just because the common experience isn't appropriate doesn't mean that we should just throw it all away. I think we can clarify that, fine tune it, and then see its proper place in that. There's always going to be a hierarchy of liturgical music and things like that. I don't think anybody, I do not want to make the argument that it should be the pride of place.
Right.
That is not praise and worship. Pride of place in liturgy, in the Mass, is always going to be chant.
Right.
And sacred music, polyphony, those types of things always have the pride of place. But there may be other places where praise and worship is also appropriate.
So Father Joseph Anthony comes down on the side of, great, let's go for it.
I think it can be done well.
Came out strong. You said that. So I will hold a more nuanced position on it. So, and in my own experience too, and praise and worship had a big part in my sort of. So I don't like the word, or like, it's not that I don't like it. I don't know if it's like a great description of what a lot of people go through in college, of like coming to the faith. Like I didn't have a big conversion in college because I never really fell away from the faith, but I wasn't really practicing the faith,
your faith, right? Like,
and praise music was part of that. In various ways. And I do listen to a good bit of it outside of, outside of whatever, just it's like on Spotify and that sort of thing. So in that world, I'm very pro. The liturgy, I'm less pro, perhaps than you. And I think that comes down to a sort of, well, what does as you were just saying, what does the church recommend? What is the point of music in our worship? And then what does it do? I think like we could say, I was going to say kind of like an anthropological, like what is it? Right. How does music like affect us as human beings?
Yes.
And I think we can talk about that, but like if it does have an effect on us, an intellectual and an emotional and spiritual effect on us, then what is it that we're feeding ourselves or being fed with, and how does that then affect our relationship with the Lord? So I think, why don't we, you mentioned this with respect to chant, sort of the pride of place. Let's talk about liturgical world first.
Okay, let's go with it.
Why not? So the church recommends types of music for worship.
Yes.
You can, especially from the Second Vatican Council and the U.S. bishops have these documents that recommend this is how the church worships in its fullness. And as you mentioned, the type of music that is most proper to the Roman liturgy, the liturgy that we celebrate in the Roman Catholic Church, that has pride of place, is chant, and most typically Gregorian chant. That's what we'd be used to. I don't know if many parishes, I would say the majority of parishes don't experience a sort of like chant mass. It's kind of a combination of things,
Yes.
You have hymns, you have different things, and you might have chant like for the ordinary, like the Sanctus or the Holy, Holy, Holy might be kind of chant setting. So the church kind of lays out, it's like chant, polyphony, which is kind of more, it's not hymnody, but it's moving lines.
Multi-part.
Yeah. Kind of, if you think kind of traditional Catholic stuff. And then hymnody, so the hymns that we sing. And then if we look at what instruments the church recommends, it's first the voice.
Yes.
And then the organ, and then other instruments. It doesn't ban, there's not like a prohibition against other types of music, but that's like you mentioned, there's this hierarchy.
Yes.
So I'll say this, and then, you can, I don't know, whatever, say what you want about it. But at least with respect to chant, the reason why chant is recommended, right, is that is because chant does two things. One, it has a simple line, so it doesn't have, like with polyphony, you have these moving lines. With hymns, you have the harmonies and these kind of things, at least played on the organ. But chant has a single line, so that allows you to focus not so much on the music, like on the notes and stuff, but more on the text.
Yeah.
And what the text of the chant and the tradition does is that it promotes the scriptures, and particularly the scriptures of the liturgical season. So that way, through everything, what's proclaimed from the pulpit, what's the prayers that are read, and what's sung, kind of, it's all of a piece. You have all these things working together, continually feeding you with the scriptures. So at least there's this sort of sense that the church wants to give us that in our worship, it all fits. It all fits of a piece. Now, is chant the only way that can fit together? Well, no, even the church has polyphony, hymnody, and other forms of music. But I think as Catholics, we have to affirm that there's this tradition and there's this tool that chant is that gives us this sort of relationship to Christ and the liturgy and all of that. Yeah,
I mean, you're hitting the really, really important point is there's an integrity in the liturgy.
Right, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Music helps to glue together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But now if music becomes kind of fractured, or it's fracturing the liturgy and the experience of that, then that's a problem.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So the music, no matter what style, I really could care less. I can see moments too where Gregorian chant can be fracturing, distracting and things like that. But the church has always instructed that the liturgical action is a singular action. Right, multiple people are involved, multiple things are happening. It takes a while. It takes a full hour and things like that. But it's a singular action, and it has to be. There's an integrity involved in that.
Yeah,
and so music helps to serve that integrity. And where does it draw its source? Okay, it draws its source from the scriptures. It draws its source from this specific action that's happening at that time. Right. Think of the Gloria. Okay, yeah, there's beautiful text in front of that. Right, but it also looks at where it happens sequentially in the liturgy, right?
Yeah.
So its musicality has to match its place in the liturgy, and all these other things. So all of that has to be taken into account when we start talking about the musicality that's being involved. Unfortunately, I think our common experience of music in the church is that of entertainment.
And often not good.
And poor.
Yeah.
That poor entertainment. Thank you. And the reason why is because we approach so much of our world based on entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so it's like people have such small, if not non-existent habits of religious worship. But they have really strong habits of entertainment.
Yeah.
And so they step into a church and they immediately switch into trying to be in an entertainment optic. And that's why then music is like, oh, this music has to be good and entertaining for it to be appropriate. Right. And that's not the case. That's not how the church looks at this.
Yeah. There's one of the things that I like to kind of point out in conversations here is what does the music do for us in that? And I think that integrity of worship is a really good way to put it, because the music is supposed to draw us in, not to something that makes me feel good on subjective terms.
Yes.
Right? Like, it's not about going to mass is not about feeling good. It's about worshiping God.
The faith is not a feeling.
Right.
Love, charity is not a feeling.
Right. I mean, our emotions, obviously you're not saying this, that our emotions aren't involved. They are, but like, that's not why we...
I don't want us to be robots.
Right, exactly. But the point here is that we worship God. So what the music in the liturgy, whatever type of music it is, and I think chant does this in ways that is that has less pitfalls in ways, as opposed to sort of sometimes praise and worship music that like mirrors kind of what we hear on the radio. Chant is in a way a safer kind of thing, we could even say, because it's more conducive in ways to draw us into prayer.
Yeah.
And I think this is, and what I was going to say is that something that I like to reiterate is that we don't come into a church to feel like to be self-soothed. Now that might be, there ought to be consolations in prayer. There ought, but the point here is to worship God. It's to be led into friendship with God, to be united to Him through, especially at Mass, like through that sacrifice of the Mass. And stepping into a church, and this is what I hate. I can say that very strongly.
Wow.
What I hate about like modern church architecture and modern church art is that it does not provide for a sort of transcendent experience that is different. Like when we step into the world, it ought to be a timeless, when we step out of the world into a church, we ought to enter in this sort of like timeless experience, this sort of like, I don't know, like foretaste of eternity, where it's different. It smells different. It looks different. It feels different. It's quiet. There's this vast space that like draws our mind and our heart to God, and all of that, all of those pieces. And that's what's beautiful about Catholic liturgy when it's done well. Yes. And that's what's beautiful about liturgical music.
Yes.
Is that it's not for itself, like you were saying, like it's not a form of entertainment, but it draws the heart and the mind into the worship of God. And Absolutely. If we can do that with different forms of music while respecting and observing what the church recommends and sees as like pride of place, other time, then great.
Yeah. And I think that's where I'm going to then start making the apology for praise and worship.
Sure.
Okay. Because like, I think these things, unfortunately, they're always polarized against each other. Chant versus praise and worship, and they're always, and I've luckily enough we experience this at our parish in Charlottesville right now. We have a fantastic director of music who's integrating the antiphons and chant into that, and then having choirs, whether that's a hymnody choir or later in the evenings for some of our evening masses, we have a praise and worship choir, band, whatever you want to call it. But there's the respect to the liturgy that the antiphons are the driving force, right?
Yeah, and those antiphons match. They're given by
the church in its liturgy,
right? And they match, the text matches the weekend and these sort of things.
Whatever follows that, whatever hymn, whatever praise and worship is in line with that antiphon, right? And the reason why is then you have this like ability to have the text moving and drawing you into the liturgy itself. You have the clarity with it that's assisting with the prayers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, once again, we can talk about this. Gregorian chant is, I think you can say, you said it's like kind of simple in that sense, but I do think it's a little bit of an acquired taste, especially when it's done in Latin, which that language is not very accessible right now. But a beautifully done text or hymn in English or praise and worship song that has that is in line with that text can help drive prayer and help lead to contemplation, help lead to worship in that sense. So I think that there's a way to actually let them both shine side by side. Yeah. And really let that happen. That I don't believe in that exclusivity to that. I do believe in the pride of place though. Yeah. Right. I do think there is a pride of place and that should never neglect it. But the others can support that. This is the last thing I'll say on this entire thing is that with all the music, like it has to be in service of the liturgy, in service of the sacrifice that's happening on the altar. Right. When it starts to lead away from that, it starts to distract from that, then that's it. And so this is why when we look at, which songs are sung, we look very closely at the text and make sure it's actually presenting the faith.
Right. And not something that just sounds pleasing and like the text is misrepresenting the truth about the Eucharist or about Our Lady,
and this is why like even praise and worship hymns, they should be somewhat contemplative. Yeah. They're not going to be just emotion driven to excite, right? We can actually sanctify our emotions through music, and there's a humanity in that, and that's beautiful. We can feel things in the liturgy, right? Yeah. We know that it's not simply a feeling, but we should allow ourselves to feel in the liturgy.
Of course.
Yeah. And music can assist that. in a really, really beautiful way, but it's not manipulating to force a specific feeling, right? It's giving that opportunity for that. So I think that it's like we shouldn't be scared of music, and we shouldn't be scared of it leading us to a depth of prayer and actually being moved by liturgy. I mean, you can be moved by a beautiful piece of polyphony or a meditation of the Ave, or the Ave sung in the meditation post-communion. These are moving pieces.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that in the very same moments with beautiful, praise and worship songs in the liturgy, in Eucharistic adoration, and all these moments. So I think if we start to step back and say, like, okay, what's its place? What's the text? What's it communicating? How is it being presented? Like the actual playing of the piece? Is it not performance-based? Is it actually leading towards worship? It then has its place, but it will never have the pride of place that chant and polyphony has within the church's life.
Yeah. Yeah. So that pride of place bit that we've talked about a couple times I think it is an important thing for us to keep in mind. And so I think it's sort of a question for me is like, okay, well, where does praise and worship music lead? And that's sort of a bigger question of what is the end of like music in our worship and in our prayer. And I think you've pointed out a few things that are true. Like, is it at the service of the liturgy, or does like the praise band or the organist or whomever keep going? One of my biggest pet peeves is like when I'm ready to say the next prayer, when I'm celebrating mass, and like we're starting another verse of the hymn. It's like, no, the liturgy's moving and I'm not here to wait for you, because it's of a piece. This isn't a performance. It's like,
oh yeah. So, and there's a 25-minute organ concert in the middle of the offertory. You're like, oh, this is a totally different thing. But also we've seen, the praise leader take control of the liturgy, the Gloria, and it's like, oh my gosh. So I think you're bringing up a really good point. Like, you has to understand and be attentive to the liturgy that's happening, and making sure that, like I said, the image I use is like it's the glue that kind of keeps that movement happening. Right.
So I guess to sort of think about liturgy, and then also as we were talking about this sort of our own devotion, our spiritual life, kind of bridging that together, is like, what is the end? What is it? Is it just, as you were kind of talking about, is it just for the sort of emotional kind of fulfillment, or is music in our worship and in our prayer, or if we're even just like listening in the car or like whatever, what is it drawing me towards? And it has to be, we have to constantly think, is this helping me to come, one, to know the Lord and to love the Lord? One of the things that I think is sort of a shallow way to approach it is sort of like, well, to think about our time in prayer, whether it's my own time, whether it's like in the car listening to music, whether it's at mass as well, what did I feel in this? It's like, emotions, feelings, they're part of who we are and they're part of our worship. But the end has to be, it's like, what have I come to learn about the Lord? How is he revealing himself to me? And, how is he inviting me to love him more? And if music is just a sort of it just has an entertainment value, then that needs to be reassessed. Whether that's praise and worship, whether that's polyphony with a big choir, whether it's like a big orchestra, whatever it might be, that has to be reassessed. If it's just a sort of emotional thing, and sometimes I've described this is my hot take. So, you might not like it, but
I'm not.
Sometimes I describe praise and worship music, especially in a liturgical or prayer context, as sort of junk food Catholicism. The reason for this is because it has often, if we appeal just to the sort of emotional fix, like I just need to feel something, I need to drum up these emotions. I need to feel sad, or I need to feel like really happy, or I need, whatever it might be. Then we sort of get this like praise music can be like that junk food fix where it's like tastes really good in the moment, but like it really doesn't fill you. It really doesn't draw you in. It's just that like quick fix, and then you need more. I don't think it has to be that way, but I think that is a pitfall of sort of when our spiritual life and the way in which we worship closely mirrors onto like pop music, for example, or that sort of thing. Now, does it have to be that way? No, but is that a pitfall to worry about, especially in our devotion, prayer, and worship? I think it is. I think we just have to call a spade and that can be
And
a
I think,
danger.
yeah, we can talk about devotions in all of its way, but when we're talking about praise and worship as a devotion, like that's its natural kind of temptation.
Yeah.
Rosaries and Divine Mercy chaplets and other things have their natural temptations as well. But
Sure.
we're dealing with music. Music of its very nature is emotional. So like when that's overdone, it's going to go to an extreme, and that's its natural temptation.
Right.
So like I think you're saying like just be aware of that, right? Because not that any type of music, because music addresses the emotions, right? And we hear St. Augustine talking about how, only the lover sings and things like that. Like there's this deep understanding of the emotional capacity of which music taps into, speaks from, and things like that. But that could always go too far.
Yeah.
And it become just based on that. So it's like that awareness to say like, okay, this is its temptation of this genre.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be aware of that and say like, is it now in a prudential way addressing that, sanctifying that, or is it becoming the substance of that?
Yeah.
Is its excess the substance? And if that's the case, then that's a problem
Right.
as well.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
And it just there's some really, really beautiful moments. And I know this is a little of a kind of a personal take on these things. Like the reason why I love praise and worship so much, and I mean,
Please tell me.
It's not it's not something that is going to be pretty shocking, especially to my students and friends. Is like I love music. Like I really, really love music. I have a very eclectic musical taste. But part of the reason I love that is I'm not very articulate and I cannot express myself very well. But singers, songwriters, they can always like I can say like, yes, I've felt that before. I've had that experience, or that's what I've always wanted to say and never could find the words or things like that. I've had that tremendous experience in prayer with praise and worship. There's all these songs, and I'm not going to plug all of them. I wish I could, but like the amount of times I just go in the chapel late at night and I'll put on my earbuds because it's like I want to speak to the Lord, and I know I'm struggling, I'm hurting, but the only way I can do it is with this song. And so like it provides that place for me in a very devotional life.
Yeah.
So I know that we started off talking about the liturgy, and now we're kind of moving into its role in our devotional life. But just as an example for me, I use praise and worship as that way to speak to the Lord because I'm an idiot. I don't know how to use words good. Okay.
That's
but
beautiful.
other people do.
Yeah.
And so I can borrow their words.
Yeah.
And then give them to the Lord as my prayer.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I don't know if I've ever worn like headphones to listen to music in the chapel. I'm not against it. I don't think you should do that when other people are there. And I know that's not what you're doing.
No, I'm not like putting them on speakerphone.
I know that. That's not what I'm saying. But it is. But I had a conversation recently, relatively recently with somebody about music. It wasn't like in depth about this, but someone said something like they don't, I forgot what it was. It doesn't matter, but they really like, whereas for like reading for some people really helps them like settle and listen and like listen to our Lord, and be like music for him played that role where it's like, it draws you in, it settles, it clears the mind, and like, so I think that can be a very helpful thing for people. And I think just kind of, so final takeaways. Father Joseph Anthony hates anything in liturgy that's not praise and worship.
Exactly.
And all the laser lights that you can get.
I want the best experience. I want fog machines.
That's right.
Yeah, laser lights.
Yeah.
I want people rappelling from the domes, just like full Mission Impossible style at the Epiclesis.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's really
we need
beautiful.
to make this as huge of a performance as we can have it.
That's right. Yeah.
I want to spend $1.5 million. Okay, sorry.
Amen. Yeah.
All of that is sarcasm, by the way. That is not what I desire in the liturgy. I want a deep encounter with the Lord Jesus.
Well, and I think that's it, right?
That's it.
It's that encounter with our Lord. It's being drawn into something bigger than ourselves in the midst of the liturgy and in our prayer. And it's allowing, I think, the sort of humility of the Christian life, that it's not, it's an invitation to share our life with God, to share his life. It's an invitation to worship him. It's an invitation to be loved and healed by him. And like, as you were saying before, it's all of an integral whole of what we do. And we have to, I think, trust Holy Mother Church and her recommendations and the wisdom and the prudence behind these recommendations. And also we can't sort of be more Catholic than the church is Catholic. So I think there are appropriate times for praise and worship, and there aren't appropriate times. And it's finding, trusting the church's guidance, using the, prudence here, but also being drawn into this relationship with our Lord. So I think if we do that, we're probably on, safe ground. Is that the phrase? Is that the phrase? Safe ground, sound ground, solid ground?
Solid ground.
Solid ground. We got there. Yes. Okay. All right. The Rock. There. We're going to end with The Rock. Okay. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. Please be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to help support the project, please check out our Patreon page. All of those links are in the show notes below. One exciting thing to announce on this episode, as we're getting closer to the summer's coming, is that we are hosting an all-comers retreat like we did last summer, again this summer, in June 16th through 18th. At the Malvern Retreat Center in Malvern, Pennsylvania. So if you're interested in that retreat, there's a lot more information on our website, godsplaining.org. Thanks so much for tuning in. Know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us. And until next time, God bless.